2 leaders. 1 secret city. No cameras. No press. No official record. And then, one side says it happened. The other says it never did. So which one is lying, and why? Welcome back. If you're new here, you've arrived on the right day. My name is, host name, and today we're diving deep into one of the most diplomatically explosive stories of 2026. In the middle of an active war, as missiles were still flying and intelligence agencies were working around the clock, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu allegedly boarded a plane, flew to the United Arab Emirates, met the UAE's president in a remote desert city, shook hands, and flew home. No announcement. No photos. No press conference. Just a quiet, top-secret meeting that, depending on who you ask, either never happened, or changed the Middle East forever. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what we know, what we don't know, why both sides are telling very different stories, and what this diplomatic shadow play means for the future of the region. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Stories like this are what we do here. Let's get into it. To understand why this story matters, you first need to understand the world it happened in. In late February 2026, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated military campaign against Iran, what became known as Operation Roaring Lion on the Israeli side, and Operation Epic Fury on the American side. It was a campaign years, arguably decades, in the making. Israel had been warning the world about Iran's nuclear ambitions since the early 2000s. Iran had been funding proxy forces across the region, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, militia networks in Iraq and Syria. When the window finally opened, Israel and the United States moved. The strikes began. Tehran responded. And here's where things get interesting for our story. Iran didn't just fire back at Israel. Iran fired at its neighbors too. The United Arab Emirates, a Gulf nation that had normalized ties with Israel back in 2020 through the Abraham Accords, found itself directly in Iran's crosshairs. According to the Emirati Defense Ministry, Iran launched approximately 550 ballistic and cruise missiles and over 2,200 drones at the UAE during the conflict. That's not a typo. 2,200 drones. The UAE became the most targeted country in the entire conflict, more than Israel itself. Think about that. A nation that had been largely at peace, whose skyline is full of gleaming towers and whose economy depends on global investment, was suddenly under a missile and drone assault on a scale that shocked the region. So as the UAE's leadership sat in their war rooms, watching Iranian projectiles light up their radar screens, they made some choices. And those choices, quiet, behind closed doors, away from any press cameras, would pull Israel and the UAE closer together than anyone had publicly acknowledged. This is the world in which our mystery meeting allegedly took place. On Wednesday, May 13, 2026, weeks after a ceasefire between the US, Israel, and Iran took effect, Benjamin Netanyahu's office dropped a statement that immediately detonated across every newsroom in the world. The statement said, and I'm paraphrasing carefully here, that the Prime Minister had made a secret visit to the United Arab Emirates during the war, where he met personally with UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. The Israeli Prime Minister's office called it a historic breakthrough in relations between the two countries. No date was given in the official statement. No photos were released. But sources familiar with the meeting told news organizations that the two leaders met in Al Ain, a quiet, historic oasis city near the UAE's border with Oman, roughly 250 kilometers from Iran's coast. The date, according to those sources, March 26, 2026. The meeting reportedly lasted several hours. Now, here's one very specific detail that stood out to journalists covering the story. On that exact same day, March 26, the commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's Navy was killed. Coincidence? Maybe. Maybe not. But the statement from Israel's Prime Minister's office didn't end there. Hours after the announcement, Netanyahu's former chief of staff and spokesperson, Ziv Agman, posted a remarkable message on social media. He wrote, and this is worth hearing carefully, that as someone who had accompanied the Prime Minister on the historic trip that has been top secret until today, he could confirm that Netanyahu was received in Abu Dhabi with the honor of kings. He went further. He wrote that Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the UAE's president, personally drove Netanyahu from the plane to the palace in his own car. That bin Zayed's family members and senior dignitaries were present. That they were happy to see the Prime Minister of Israel on their soil. This wasn't just a diplomatic claim. This was a first-hand account from someone who says they were in the room, or rather, in the car. Now, add one more layer to the Israeli narrative. The day before Netanyahu's office made this announcement, the United States ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, had publicly confirmed something remarkable. Israel had sent Iron Dome air defense batteries and Israeli military personnel to operate them, to the UAE. Israeli soldiers. On Emirati soil. Defending an Arab nation from Iranian missiles. Huckabee called the Israel-UAE relationship extraordinary. He praised the UAE as an example of what the Abraham Accords could achieve in practice. So the picture Israel was painting was this: a deeply integrated wartime partnership, sealed in secret by a face-to-face meeting between two leaders who trusted each other enough to shake hands in a desert city while a war was raging. That's Israel's version of events. Now let's hear the other side. Hours after Netanyahu's office made its announcement, the UAE's government responded. And they didn't hedge. They didn't say, "We have no comment" or "We're looking into this." They issued a flat, unambiguous denial. The UAE Foreign Ministry, in a statement carried by the country's official state news agency WAM, said that the reports about a Netanyahu visit were, quote, entirely unfounded. They went further. They said the UAE's relations with Israel are public and conducted within the framework of the well-known and officially declared Abraham Accords, and that these relations are not based on non-transparent or unofficial arrangements. They called on media outlets to exercise accuracy and professionalism, and to refrain from circulating unverified information or promoting misleading political narratives. And they didn't just deny the Netanyahu visit. They also denied that any Israeli military delegation had been received in the UAE during the war, this at the same time the U.S. ambassador had just publicly confirmed an Iron Dome battery was deployed there. So you have a situation where the U.S. ambassador says Israel sent defense weapons and troops to the UAE white heavy checkmark. The UAE denies receiving an Israeli military delegation crossmark. Both things cannot be fully true at the same time. Now, why would the UAE issue such a forceful denial? Let's be analytical here, because this is where the story gets genuinely fascinating. The UAE is not just a country at war. It is a global financial hub, a place that has spent decades carefully positioning itself as a neutral, business-friendly, cosmopolitan destination. Billions of dollars of international investment flow through Dubai and Abu Dhabi every single year. And the UAE has something else to think about, its position in the Arab world. Despite the Abraham Accords, the normalization of ties with Israel remains deeply controversial among Arab public opinion. The Palestinian issue is emotionally charged across the Middle East. Netanyahu, in particular, carries enormous political baggage. He faces an international criminal court arrest warrant over the war in Gaza. Being seen publicly embracing Netanyahu, in secret, during a war, is not simple politics for the UAE. An Abu Dhabi media personality named Sultan Al-Ali perhaps said it most clearly when he was quoted by the Israeli news outlet Ynet. He argued that the UAE's denial was designed to prevent the impression of secret military coordination, but crucially, the denial did not repudiate the relationship itself. It just pushed back against the framing. There's a difference between saying, "This never happened," and saying, "We don't do things in secret." And that distinction matters a great deal. Here's what makes the Israel-UAE story even harder to dismiss as fiction. The Netanyahu visit announcement didn't come in isolation. It was accompanied by a separate, and in some ways even more significant, set of revelations. On the same day Netanyahu's office made its claim, the Wall Street Journal reported that the director of Mossad, Israel's legendary foreign intelligence agency, David Barnea, had made at least 2 visits to the UAE during the war to coordinate military operations. Separately, Israeli public broadcaster Kan reported that the head of Shin Bet, Israel's domestic security agency, also visited the UAE for security and intelligence coordination. 2 intelligence chiefs. Multiple visits. During an active war. The Wall Street Journal didn't get that from a social media post. That's a serious publication with serious sourcing requirements. And what were they coordinating? According to multiple reports, Israel and the UAE were working together on intelligence sharing about Iranian missile launches and drone swarms, detection and interception of Iranian aerial threats in Emirati airspace, selection of Iranian targets for strikes during the campaign. And according to one explosive report, the UAE reportedly even carried out its own secret strikes on Iran, including on an oil refinery on Lavin Island in the Persian Gulf. Let's pause on that last point for a moment. If that's true, if the UAE not only defended itself from Iranian missiles but actively struck back at Iran, that is a seismic shift in Middle Eastern geopolitics. The Gulf states have spent decades carefully balancing between Iran and the West. An Emirati military strike on Iranian soil would represent a total transformation of that posture. Now, why is all of this relevant to whether Netanyahu visited? Because it paints a picture of a relationship that had gone far, far beyond diplomatic handshakes and trade deals. This was wartime operational cooperation at the highest level. And when you're coordinating at that level, when Mossad directors are flying in for meetings, when Iron Dome batteries are being deployed, when your intelligence agencies are sharing target lists, it becomes entirely plausible, perhaps even expected, that the 2 leaders would want to meet personally. That's how alliances work. At a certain point, the leaders need to look each other in the eye. Tehran had something to say about all of this. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, took to the social media platform X, formerly Twitter, and posted a message that was simultaneously a threat, a boast, and a warning. He wrote that, Netanyahu has now publicly revealed what Iran's security services long ago conveyed to our leadership, meaning Iran claimed it already knew about the visit and had passed that intelligence up its chain of command. Interestingly, he did not explain why Iran hadn't gone public with this intelligence at the time. If they knew, why wait? But his core message was unmistakable. He wrote, enmity with the great people of Iran is a foolish gamble. Collusion with Israel in doing so, unforgivable. That word, unforgivable, is not diplomatic language. That is a warning. And notably, Iran's reaction actually supports the Israeli version of events. If Tehran's foreign minister is responding to the claim as though it's real, calling it collusion, issuing warnings, that's a form of de facto confirmation. You don't typically issue angry warnings about things you believe are complete fabrications. Iran's reaction also gave the story a new dimension. It was no longer just a diplomatic curiosity. It was now a security variable, proof, if any was needed, that this story carries real-world consequences for everyone in the region. To fully grasp what this alleged meeting represents, whether it happened exactly as described or not, you need to understand the journey that brought Israel and the UAE to this point. The Abraham Accords were signed on September 15, 2020, on the South Lawn of the White House. UAE Foreign Minister Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed and Prime Minister Netanyahu signed on behalf of their respective countries, with President Trump presiding. It was presented to the world as a peace deal, but more accurately, it was a normalization agreement. Israel and the UAE hadn't been at war. They'd simply never had formal diplomatic relations. The deal came with certain understandings. Israel was supposed to suspend plans to annex parts of the West Bank. There would be trade, tourism, direct flights, and business deals. The UAE became a destination for Israeli tourists. Israeli tech companies began setting up in Dubai. But the accords were never without friction. Netanyahu attempted to visit the UAE after beginning his sixth term as prime minister in December 2022. The visit was cancelled. The reason? Anger over National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir's provocative visit to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. A senior Arab diplomat also noted that there were concerns Netanyahu might use the platform to publicly threaten Iran, which was not something Abu Dhabi wanted to be associated with at that time. So as of early 2026, Netanyahu had never actually set foot in the UAE since the accords were signed. Then the war started. And suddenly everything changed. When Iranian missiles began raining down on Emirati cities, when the security calculus shifted from theory to reality, the Abraham Accords stopped being a diplomatic ceremony and became something operational, practical, and urgent. Senior Emirati official Anwar Gargash, an advisor to the country's president, perhaps summarized the shift best when he said in March that Iranian attacks on Arab neighbors would only strengthen relations between Israel and those Arab states with diplomatic ties. He was right. Under fire, the relationship didn't fracture. It hardened. And that context makes it not just plausible but perhaps necessary that the leaders of those two countries would find a way to meet, quietly, away from cameras, to look each other in the eye and make commitments that go beyond any written accord. So here's the central question: did the meeting happen? Let's assess the evidence rationally. In support of the meeting happening, Netanyahu's official prime minister's office issued a formal statement, not a rumor, not a leak. A named, identified former aide, Ziv Agman, says he was personally present and described specific details: the car ride, the welcome, the family members. The Wall Street Journal reported on multiple Mossad director visits to the UAE, supporting a pattern of high-level in-person contact. Iran's foreign minister responded as though the meeting was real, issuing specific warnings about collusion. A source cited by Reuters specifically named the location, Al Ain, and said the meeting lasted several hours. Against the meeting happening as described, the UAE issued an official, categorical denial through its foreign ministry. No photos were released, unusual for a historic breakthrough. The UAE also denied receiving any Israeli military delegation, a claim already contradicted by the U.S. ambassador. Here's what I think is actually happening, and this is based on how these things work in the real world of diplomacy. The meeting almost certainly happened. The UAE's denial is almost certainly performative, designed for a specific audience. That audience is the Arab public, Palestinian advocacy groups, investors nervous about regional stability, and Iran itself, which the UAE still needs to live next to, war or no war. When Sultan Al Ali, the Abu Dhabi media personality, told Ynet that the denial was meant to prevent the impression of secret military coordination, he was essentially describing a diplomatic face-saving maneuver. The UAE is saying, we do things officially, within frameworks, openly. We are not a secret military partner of Israel. We are a respectable, neutral, business-friendly nation. They are not necessarily saying, that meeting didn't happen. There's a reason they didn't say, Benjamin Netanyahu has never set foot in the UAE. They chose much more careful language about official arrangements, about the Abraham Accords framework, about transparency. That's not an accident. That's diplomacy. And Netanyahu's side almost certainly knew that the UAE would deny it publicly. They may have even expected it. The announcement may have served a specific Israeli domestic or political purpose, showing that even in the middle of a war, Netanyahu was securing historic breakthroughs for Israel. Two versions of reality, both carefully crafted, both serving a purpose, can coexist in the same diplomatic space. That is the nature of statecraft in the modern Middle East. Whether or not every detail of this story is exactly as Israel described it, the broader story is unmistakably real. The Abraham Accords have become something harder and more consequential than their architects may have anticipated. They began as trade deals and tourism announcements. They have evolved, under pressure, under fire, into a defense and intelligence partnership operating in real time during a live conflict. Israel deployed Iron Dome batteries to defend an Arab nation. Mossad directors flew to Gulf cities for wartime coordination meetings. Iranian targets may have been struck by Emirati forces. If that's the Abraham Accords at work, then those accords have passed their first real test. The bigger question is, what comes next? Will this deepen? Other Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, which also signed the accords, are watching closely. If the UAE's alignment with Israel during the Iran conflict has strengthened rather than weakened its security position, that is a lesson other Gulf states will internalize. The potential for broader Gulf-Israel security cooperation, and perhaps even formal Saudi-Israeli normalization, which was being discussed before October 7, 2023 derailed the conversation, is back on the table. Iran's strategy of using the Palestinian cause to isolate Israel in the Arab world is showing serious cracks. And the United States, under the current administration, is clearly willing to be an active facilitator of that realignment. Huckabee's public disclosure of the Iron Dome deployment was not accidental. It was a signal. The Middle East that emerges from this war will look different. The question is whether the quiet alliances forged in oasis cities during missile attacks will hold in peacetime, when cameras are present, when public opinion matters, and when the immediate threat has faded. Let's bring it all together. On May 13, 2026, Netanyahu's office announced that the Israeli Prime Minister had made a secret wartime visit to the UAE, meeting with President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan in the city of Al Ain on March 26, during the U.S.-Israeli military campaign against Iran. A named eyewitness, Netanyahu's own former chief of staff, confirmed the trip and described the reception as royal. The UAE flatly denied it, calling the claims unfounded and insisting its relationship with Israel operates only through official, transparent frameworks. Iran issued a threatening response, treating the claim as real. The intelligence picture, Mossad directors visiting, Iron Dome batteries deployed, joint target coordination, paints a portrait of a partnership that goes far, far beyond what's written in any official document. The most likely reality. The meeting happened. The UAE's denial is diplomatic self-protection, carefully worded, strategically deployed, and designed not to destroy the relationship but to protect the UAE's image in a complicated region. What this story reveals, ultimately, is something profound about the new Middle East. The old categories, Arab world versus Israel, Gulf states versus Tel Aviv, are dissolving under the pressure of a shared Iranian threat. Alliances are being forged in secret. Deals are being made without cameras. And when those deals come to light, both sides reach for their official statements, while the real story plays out in oasis cities, behind palace walls, and in war rooms where nobody is taking notes for the press. That is diplomacy. That is war. And that is the Middle East in 2026. If you made it this far, thank you.